And then let me share my screen. So, morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this leadership or business growth workshop. The whole premise of today's session is about trust-centered leadership. So how we start to develop greater trust with our teams. And we'll talk a bit about how that then creates foundations for team success. These sessions on Friday morning, they do change sometimes depending on my commitments. I can't always make a Friday morning, but generally speaking, I try and make them a Friday morning because end of the week, Friday is generally a good day for people to spend some time reflecting and also thinking about their own professional development. These sessions are a bit of thinking space. So an opportunity just to get off the treadmill, really give yourself that clear opportunity to start to think differently rather than just kind of doing the same things that perhaps you might do week by week. So we'll share some ideas. The way the sessions run, we'll do it in 3 parts. So first part is kind of 15, 20 minutes. I'll share some ideas with you, hopefully plant some useful seeds. Then in the middle section, second section, we'll give you a chance just to talk about it. We might do that in a couple of breakout rooms this morning. So but perhaps give you a chance to meet somebody new and have a conversation about what you've learned and what you might be doing differently as a result of it. And then we'll take some feedback and I'll share a few final messages and then we'll wrap up. And we'll be done by 5 to 10. So you'll have 5 minutes. You might even get that shower in, Gary, before your 10 o'clock, potentially.
I'm probably still in this state at 4 o'clock, mate. So it's fine.
Well, as long as you've got some deodorant on, you'll be all right.
Yeah.
Well, they've got squatty shower, they call that, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about trust-centered leadership. We'll talk about why building trust with your team is important. We'll talk about some key responsibilities of leadership that perhaps, not always obvious, and you might be missing some of them. We'll also talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and where that fits with trust. And then we'll have a discussion. You can discuss about how to improve engagement, motivation, and performance of your teams as a result of today's session. So hopefully some useful insights for you. And as you go into today's session, just have your kind of radar on for the things that are most appropriate for you and your business. So why do we focus on trust and leadership? Lots of research in this area. ADP did a research study that showed that trust in the leader is the foundation for employee engagement. And those employees who trust the leader are 12 times more likely to be engaged. So the leader directly impacts employee engagement. And, common sense would tell us that would be the case, but a 12x difference between those leaders that have engaged their teams or have trust with their teams and those that don't. And I'm sure you can all relate to that throughout your careers when you've got someone that a leader you're working with, you really trust. Your engagement is 12x higher. And then, of course, if we think about engagement and what that means for employees, then highly engaged employees are 4 times less likely to leave their employer. So retention is much greater for those employees who trust the leader and therefore are engaged. So we get this drop in leavers of the organization and an increase in retention. And there's a direct correlation between then we think we're kind of joining up the dots between employee engagement and client satisfaction scores. So if you've got highly engaged employees, you get a 4 times higher level of client satisfaction because they're dealing with employees that are engaged in their work and really want to deliver that experience for the clients. And then we start to think about what does that mean for revenue? So companies with highly engaged employees deliver 2.5 times higher revenue compared with those companies with lower employee engagement scores. So different research showing, the correlation between trust and what it means for results. And then when we think about how that trust and leadership fits with your leadership style, coaching as a leadership style tends to have a greater engagement of teams as well. And a coaching leadership style increases adoption of change and team performance versus, say, more directive management by about 3.5 times. So we start joining up the dots between trust, leadership, coaching, and they're the 3 kind of areas where we'll focus today. And so, we think about what it takes to develop that trust and how we can inspire others to kind of be better as leaders within our businesses. And it kind of brings us quite nicely to kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure you've seen this before. It's a good reminder if you've seen it before. If you haven't, it would be a useful kind of structure to think about. But Abraham Maslow did this kind of pioneering research where he joined up, really what it means for employees of organizations and what that means for them, and how they progress through their careers. And what he talked about in the first instance was that actually people need to have their physiological needs met first. So their needs, almost survival needs, right? So air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, that sort of thing. So actually getting that in place is really important. And as we talk through this, I'll explain why this is vital for leaders in businesses. Then people need to, once you get physiological needs met, then you have to think about safety needs, so personal security, having a regular income, having access to resources, having their health, having maybe a property. That's the kind of next level. But physiological needs first, then safety needs. And all of this is quite straightforward. Then once those two levels of needs are met, then people start to think about love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, personally, family, series of connections, and their business network, right? So they need the first two layers in before they can get to that third layer. And once the love and belonging needs are in place, whether that be personally or professionally, then they can start to think about, their own self-esteem, respect for themselves, gaining some form of recognition, starting to find strength and development, and kind of sense of freedom in what they're doing and how they operate. And then the final level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is what they call self-actualization needs. This is when people go, that I've achieved a certain amount. Now I want to get to a point where I've become the best that I can be. And self-actualization is about really fulfilling one's potential, fulfilling your team, fulfilling their potential, you as leaders fulfilling your potential. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because if any of your team, and you'll experience this, I'm sure, if any of your team have like a personal crisis or something going on in their life that threatens, relationships, or threatens their personal security or safety, or actually physiological needs, they're having trouble, perhaps even, perhaps their where they live is at risk or whatever. All of this trumps anything we can work with them on as leaders. And so all of a sudden we have this disconnect. If we don't get this piece right, then actually we can create an issue for ourselves and our team. So sometimes we might have to recognize that people go up and down this hierarchy of needs, and our job as leaders is to respond to that accordingly. And the thing that's particularly interesting for me, I don't know if you've been on these sessions before, you might have seen this, but when Abraham Maslow met Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl, as I'm sure of you may have heard, wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And in Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl talks extensively about actually thinking beyond ourselves and thinking about what we can do for, how we can contribute to the community around us, and greater humankind. And following that meeting with Viktor Frankl, Abraham Maslow added a final layer to his hierarchy of needs. You don't often see it, but the final hierarchy of needs level is self-transcendence. So this is where we find something that is beyond ourselves. So it's like, volunteering, charity work, getting involved in some kind of purpose or cause that means something to us in our local communities. And actually, a lot of the times in leadership, we perhaps miss this as a real opportunity to start to think, if you've got people who are really at the top of their game, and asking, where do we go next? Actually, perhaps where you go next is how do we help them to transcend themselves, transcend their own kind of development plan, and think about contributing to something bigger. And in terms of trust, trust really, if you pick the level, right, it's love, it's this kind of belonging. It's being connected with people, but recognizing that sometimes, people will go up and down this hierarchy of needs. As I said, if crises happen in their lives, and actually as leaders, if you're able to help and support teams through those difficult periods, actually your trust strengthens to a point where you'll get the next level of discretionary effort and commitment from your teams. And we all kind of know that as trust may need to drop a level depending on people's situations. And then let's just quickly touch on the key responsibilities of leadership that links again to Maslow. Then I'll be interested to get some feedback and give you a chance to talk about this with each other in your groups. So, key responsibilities of leadership. I like to think about these because they're not always obvious. But the one thing to remember is that in leadership positions, we're always being observed. So people will do what we do, not what we say. And actually, that's a big element of leadership responsibility, that people will continually observe what we're doing. And that does put somewhat a bit of pressure on us as leaders, but it's really important that we recognize that, because it helps us to step into, always doing the right thing, always kind of living the values that we believe are right and proper for our business. And so I think about these 5 different responsibilities of leadership. The first responsibility of leadership is to create, we talked about physiological needs and safety needs, but actually Maslow doesn't talk about psychological safety. And psychological safety has become much more important in the modern day working world, because the way the mind and the body react to physical threats, they do that in exactly the same way when it comes to psychological threats. So if someone's in your business and they feel psychologically threatened, maybe by an aggressive team member or an aggressive manager, or someone that's perhaps a little more perhaps less emotionally intelligent and more direct and aggressive, actually that they will respond the same way that they respond to physiological threat. So they'll actually feel the same level of panic or fear, or they might not be able to speak, or they might find themselves withdrawing. And actually, so talking about psychological safety, recognizing when somebody might need some support, that's really important as a leader, because otherwise we'll get teams that are withdrawn and don't contribute, and certainly don't innovate the way we need them to. So psychological safety first. Second, then this is the heart of this session really, is about building a relationship of trust, helping people to understand that they can trust us as leaders, and that it's a two-way street, that we trust them as well. And I'm a big believer in kind of giving trust and allowing people to accept it and honor it, and then actually if anybody breaks my trust, then that's theirs to earn back. But actually I give it freely in the first instance. I think that's a really useful starting point. Yes, it means that every now and then you might find someone takes advantage, but actually it's much better than going into relationships and being wary and not trusting people. So second is build a relationship of trust. And then third is about creating clarity. So if you look at number one employee engagement statistic, what is the number one thing that engages employees? It's I am clear of what's expected of me at work. The number one thing that engages employees. And as leaders, you have this disproportionate impact on your teams in being able to create clarity of expectations and goals. And generally speaking, people will spend a lot of time on job descriptions. We'll have a lot of good work in terms of what does a job look like. But then when someone comes into the job, actually sitting down and saying, having this conversation about what are the expectations of the role, what are the goals, how do we measure that, how do we review that and coach people towards it, that tends to be a bit of a gap in organizations. So real opportunity to create greater clarity for your teams, and only the leader can do it. And then the fourth thing, and these are layers, right? So once the first 3 layers are in place, then our role and an opportunity for us is to really create some energy, positivity, motivation, engagement, and really help our teams through, coaching and understanding what motivates them to generate this level of positive energy, personal motivation, and self-engagement. And that's a leadership coaching opportunity for all of us in our businesses. And then once we get to those 4 levels, then the 5th level is about growth and development, helping people to become the best they can be, starting to talk about, what are the areas that they want to focus on to grow and learn and develop themselves. And that really does, as a kind of roadmap for key responsibilities, and how, as leaders, we start to build really, really high levels of trust with teams and get to that next level of performance. It's a really good series of kind of simple principles that we can follow. And so in one of the programs that we run, the Coaching Leaders Academy, we have this toolkit that we work through. And in the toolkit, there's this team review document that links to these 5 responsibilities of leadership. And it's a really nice document that allows you to basically map out your team. So you put the team member in this column here, and then review each of the team members based on these 5 key elements on a scale of 1 to 10. So let's say you look at psychological safety, and you might say, well, what am I seeing from this person in my interactions with them? Where do I think they are in terms of how safe they feel psychologically in the workplace, right? So how much are they contributing? How much do they fit in? How much do they really feel like they belong? That kind of thing. Then you've got trust. So what's the relationship of trust between you and that person? And this is two-way. So how much do you trust them? How much do you believe they trust you? Then you've got clarity of goals and expectations. How clear do you believe they are and what's expected of them, and how are they performing in line with those goals and expectations? Then you've got energy, motivation, and engagement. How energized do you see them in the workplace? How much motivation do you see they have? How much are they engaged in their work and their team? Then you've got growth and development. How much are they focusing on their personal and professional growth and getting better and improving within their role? And then the final column here is about the emotional bank account. We haven't covered that today, but this is, in terms of how much we believe we have deposited in that emotional bank account. How much connection is there between us and that person? That's another element that you can score. And then, of course, once you've scored people, you can then start to think, okay, well, if there are a couple of areas that might be low on this one, for example, trust is at a 5, growth and development is a 5. Then we've got, the action is book monthly one-to-ones, get to know this person, agree the goals, and create personal development plan. And that's going to build trust, but it's also going to create improved clarity, and it's going to help them to start to learn and grow. So you then tailor your action depending on what these scores are. And this really is an awareness exercise. It's a really useful exercise to go through, that even if you don't share it with anyone, it's just an exercise that you reflect on yourself, work through with your teams. It starts to get you thinking about some of the changes you might be able to make to improve trust with your teams, their engagement, motivation, and performance. It's a really useful exercise to work through. And then, of course, there's a blank template for you to use. I'll send these as a follow-up from today's session. I'll send you the slides, and I'll send you this team review template as well, so you can use that as a starter for 10 with your teams. Okay, that's our content for the first part of our session. So let's open up a couple of breakout rooms and give you the chance to meet your colleagues and talk about what you've heard so far. So if you'd like to, just checking, let me just, yeah, that's good. So if you'd like to just have a conversation about maybe what you're doing today with, building trust with your teams, what you're thinking about based on what we've covered so far, and then just share some ideas on what you're going to do next. What are you thinking you might do next? And then we'll regroup. We'll get about 15 minutes on this, just 3 or 4 people in each room, to give everyone 5 minutes to discuss. Regroup in about 15 minutes, and then we'll take some feedback. And then I've got a couple of things I'll share with you, and then we'll wrap up the session. Okay. Enjoy your conversations. Let me open those rooms. See you back here in about 15 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed those conversations. Let's take some feedback. I noticed once I'd set the breakout rooms up, I let Zoom do it automatically, but I realized I put Chris and Chris in the same room. I hope that wasn't too confusing. But
no,
we
were okay.
Good. Well, let's start with you, that group then. So Chris, Gary, and Dorcas, what did you talk about?
I think one of the things we touched on was just in the challenges post-COVID in terms of communication. So important, predominantly based on the fact that the whole work environment has changed now. So it's even more important to have that open, honest culture, which allows you to, if you need to challenge back, to feel comfortable doing that.
Mm.
The fact that you don't always have to have face-to-face interactions with somebody, having a conversation on the phone, jumping on a Teams call, but really spending the time to really understand your team, your people, as well as you can do, links back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of really starting to understand what parts and segments of your relationship professionally are going to help support that individual to be the best person they can be.
Mm. Yeah, thanks, Chris. And you're right. The working environment has changed dramatically since COVID, hasn't it? Even for those offices and environments where people are going back into the office, there's still quite a lot of remote work alongside that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe the guys have got some other things to add from the conversations that we've just had. That was my top line anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. And Dorcas was saying about how trust can easily get broken on the initial, very early on in your career within an organisation. I mean, Dorcas, someone put words in your mouth, but a situation that Dorcas brought up was that early in her career, she was assigned, I think it was a sales project or whatever. She won a new client, and then her line manager took it off her and gave it to someone with far more experience and knowledge at the time, without explaining the context behind their decision, which then broke the trust for Dorcas, and it took ages to get feel that she could have that trust back again.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Some of those early interactions with a manager or a leader, if they're wrong, really, if for whatever reason they go wrong, it's really difficult to re-establish that trust, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm sure we've all had situations like that. I remember my first sales role, and I joined a company, and I was probably there 2 or 3 months, and then we got a new sales manager came in, and it was the strangest experience, because he was absolutely manic, and just someone who was completely wired all the time. He changed his mind on things. I started at the same time as someone else, and within a month he actually sacked her. And then he had this conversation with me where he effectively said, watch yourself or you'll be next. You kind of think, blimey, it was really weird. And then it turns out that senior management were aware of some of the things that were happening. He was only my manager for about 2 or 3 months, and then he was let go. But you can imagine that was within the 6 months of my first sales job. I was like, God, is this what it's like? It's absolutely chaotic. And that, thankfully, that wasn't what it was like. But it does make you think, God, what is happening? So yeah, I can appreciate that. Once trust is undermined, it's really difficult to re-establish it when it's undermined at that level. Yeah, good. Anything else from your group? Any other feedback?
I think the only other piece is around culture. Culture of the organisation comes from the top. And certainly what you just explained there, Justin, is a disconnect between maybe leadership, middle management, and the rest of the team. It has to come from the top, and it has to flow through the organisation. And I think organisations that do that build up a lot more credibility with their teams, and they do build that trust.
Yeah. Good point, Chris. Good point. Especially when you've got lots of levels of leadership and levels of management, you've really got to make sure that there's really strong alignment and that everybody is looking to establish and strengthen that trust as part of a culture. Yeah, good point. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Gary. Good feedback. So let's go to the next group, which was Claire, Manjula, and Steve. What did you talk about?
Okay, well, I'm happy to kick off.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Well, it was a good conversation actually, and it was a kind of mixed one because Manjula's a coach as well. So, and I've done some coaching, and Claire's actually the one that's the actual active manager at the moment. And we were talking about, from Claire's perspective as well, she has a team to managing towards KPIs. There's a culture that's progressive and quite a development culture. But we were talking a little bit from my experience from sort of senior sales roles as well. I think sometimes KPIs can get in the way. It can be they're useful to have. We talked about the way the environment is changing with Zoom calls and it being quite remote. Management is more remote. It's more difficult to actually communicate in a sort of a more perhaps a more trusting way when you're just on a more transactional kind of a process in terms of calls, etc. But actually, to find out what we were talking about was to get to the heart of the matter. Your the conversation today about building trust. I wrote down the fact that you're always being watched. I mean, it's true. We're always looking for role models. And just share. Claire was just sharing some of her experience, and we were just sharing some of ours in terms of how we've recognised that. And in fact, you almost need to overcompensate that, which I think is what the other guys were saying as well. You need to really think quite carefully about that in today's environment, where you might only meet your team face to face once or twice a month, and those sort of snatched 5 or 10 minutes at the coffee machine where you can sort of really have kind of some quite valuable inputs about advice or how you might, sorry, how you might do things. It doesn't work like that anymore. And I think, leadership is, perhaps people haven't always adapted their leadership to that. On the other side, with a lot of fast-moving tech companies, it's very driven by KPIs the whole time, and that sometimes gets in the way of a more meaningful conversation with a team member.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Steve. You're right, because we focus so much on results and performance that sometimes you can forget that we're dealing with people. And yes, people want to perform and they want to meet their expectations, but they also want that human side of the working environment, the relationship with team members, the relationship with their manager. It's really important that we get that balance right. Otherwise, people think, well, I could be doing this anywhere, and you lose loyalty.
A lot of untapped performance out there. I've seen that myself. I've experienced it myself, and I've been probably the perpetrator of it a little bit. As you know, that's why I started to look more at coaching, because you can get a lot out of people by asking the right questions, silence is golden sometimes in terms of finding out exactly what's going on with people. A lot of sales leaders don't get that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's an easy trap to fall into, isn't it? If you've been, if you've been someone that delivers and performs, and you go into a leadership role thinking actually it's all about the numbers or the performance, you are missing probably half of the capabilities of leadership. That's the thing. Yeah, good conversation. Thanks, Steve. Excellent. Anything else, Claire, Manjula, that you'd like to add? No, it looks like you did a good job, Steve. Well done. Thank you. Excellent. Great. Okay. I've got a couple of things I'd like to share with you. Anything before I start that? Anything else that that's on anyone's mind that they'd like to share as part of today's session? Anything else that's kind of bubbling away that you think this will be useful for people?
Yeah, I think just picking up with the culture piece that Chris was speaking to just now, and absolutely spot on. It comes from the top. You can't create an organizational culture unless it's driven by the top, and that's the utopian world that filters all the way down. Everybody buys into it, and we're all one happy family. But that's not the real world. And there are pockets within organizations where maybe the culture isn't quite aligned to what's being asked of the business, but it's still incumbent upon us as leaders to make sure that lives and breathes in our areas. And I have seen it given up on before. Well, they're not doing it over there. Well, no, but we're doing it here. I think that's just important, that we've got to keep banging that drum and driving that forward and creating that correct culture where there is psychological safety, there is that element of trust, and people are working towards their objectives, the agreed objectives of the business.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. You're right. And I've worked in very big companies, and you find that you get almost cultures within cultures. Don't you get the overarching culture that's hopefully inspired by leadership, and then you get people's interpretations of that. And as long as it's positive and it works, it's great. But you also get pockets where sometimes it's not quite so finely tuned, and we shouldn't let that impact our areas of responsibility. I completely agree. Yeah, really, really good. It's every leader's kind of I guess within their gift to give to create the right culture that they want for their teams. That's one that inspires and hopefully meets all of the different criteria that we talked about this morning. And it really, I remember early in my career recognizing that distinction, that actually, regardless of what else was going on, as a leader within my business, I could create a culture that was positive and inspired people. And once you lean into that, it really does make you, I guess, feel more responsible and have a greater sense of control. And that's a positive thing very often in businesses. Yeah, really good conversation this morning. Thank you, everybody. Excellent. Love it. Love it. Right. Let me just got a couple of things to share with you that hopefully are also useful, that build on today's session. So I always like to think about structure within leadership and within sales and the work that I'm doing. So many of you will have seen this before. For those of you who haven't, it'll be new. For those of you who have, it'll be a good refresher. So I like to think about this whole cycle of leadership, and it's in the book Coaching Leaders. If you haven't got a copy of the book, obviously I would recommend you buy it because I wrote it. But
it's 50 minutes.
It's a great
48 minutes. You just mentioned it.
48 minutes before I mentioned the book, Gary. I was restraining myself.
Normally it's 8 minutes, not 48. I'm impressed, mate.
I'm finally growing up, Gary. I'm finally growing up. So genuinely, if you haven't read the book, then it's a really good read. If you'd like a digital copy on me, I'll send it to you. So please just drop me a note and I'll happily post. Don't need to post a digital copy. I'll email you a digital copy if you'd like one to read in your own time. And it works through all of these different elements. So the 5 key responsibilities of leadership we talked about today really sit in trust and relationships. We then talk about having a plan, being able to communicate that plan to your team so that people buy in. Once people have bought into the plan, it's then about having an agreement about how you'll work together. So contracting with them. What are the standards we meet? What are the values that we want to uphold within the business, and kind of having that as an agreement with everybody that you work with. Then being able to set really clear objectives and goals and a structure for being able to manage and track those goals, KPIs and objectives. Then creating some space for your team to do their work and for you to observe, because when leaders spend some time observing their teams, it helps because we create this opportunity to kind of make them more aware of perhaps where they have blind spots or development areas, and then we can coach them for change. And that coaching, those coaching interactions, are what drive higher levels of performance. And then finally, we start to think about, long term, how do we help each of our team to see where they fit in the organization? I call this stage heroes in the making, and really helping them to build out a development plan, think about where their greatest talents lie and how they really reach their full potential. That's our roadmap, and then that becomes a cycle that you follow, quarterly and then annually. If you want to test your leadership, coaching leadership score, we've got this great resource called the Coaching Leaders Toolkit. Coaching Leaders Scorecard. I'm just going to pop that link in the chat in case anybody would like to take the scorecard. There's the score. It's completely free of charge. Gives you an opportunity just to kind of test certain elements of leadership and where you sit today. I also love to share these 5 things, because these are 5 things that really took me a long time to figure out for myself. But what does it take to succeed as a leader? We need space for confidentiality. We need to be able to have confidential conversations where we share our vulnerabilities, where we share perhaps some of the challenges that we can't share more widely in our organization. Perhaps we don't want our managers to know, but confidentiality is really important. Second is community, and we try and build this as part of these workshops, start to build a community of people like you, so that you feel like you've got an opportunity to share and learn from other people. And that links to collaboration. So collaborating on ideas, hearing what other people are doing really helps us to get our performance to the next level. And then the final couple of things, challenge. We need people to challenge our perceptions, challenge our ideas sometimes, because there's some really interesting evidence that shows that the mind tends to go back to the same thoughts 90% of the time. And if we don't have someone to challenge and disrupt our thinking, then we'll just do what we've always done. And that isn't often serving us. And then the final thing is commitment. Once you've got all these things in place, actually making a commitment to yourself and to someone else to make a change. So accountability to move and change with the evolution of what you're learning. And we build those into each of the different programs that we run. Final thing, if you'd like to book a strategy session and just kind of have a conversation about what's happening for you, perhaps specifically talk about your business or perhaps your team or perhaps what you're working on in terms of leadership development, then feel free to follow the link in the chat, which is a link to my diary. That'll give you a 45-minute discovery session where you can book in and just get perhaps some more tailored or more bespoke coaching around what you're working on today. And if there's anything I can do to help, I will. If you think one of our programs might be useful for you, then we can talk about that as well. Okay, that is everything for this morning. Final thing for me is just an opportunity just to pause and say, if you have any questions or if there's anything we've covered today that you'd like to open up and explore a bit more, then just an opportunity to do that before we close. Anybody got a final question or a final comment before we wrap up and close today's session?
I think that the last one from me, Justin, is just touching on the comments around KPIs. Not that I don't think KPIs are not important. I think they are. Number one, you've got to measure the right KPIs. Number two, it's ironic when businesses are doing really well.
We've lost you, Chris. Carry on.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. When businesses are doing really well, nobody cares about the KPIs. When businesses are not doing well, they pivot to them. But I think the comment that you made, Justin, is really important. Your people drive the achievement of those KPIs. And that's why it's really, really important to focus on them and not get paralyzed by what the numbers tell you, because underneath the numbers are your team and your people, and they drive them.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in total agreement. Yeah.
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah, well said. Well
What do you
said.
think, Seb? What do you think, Seb?
Yeah. He needs to change the team he supports, though. Come on, you should have a Liverpool top on. Arsenal, what the hell?
Well done, Seb. Well done. Good contribution. Lovely to see you. Thank you, Chris. That's really useful. You're absolutely right, and it's at the heart of this session, right? It's about trust, people, and that's what drives the performance, not the numbers themselves and measuring the numbers. Really, really insightful. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining this morning. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Hope you've met somebody new and had a chance to discuss some ideas and got at least a couple of things to take away and bring back into your teams and into your business. Well, that just remains for me to say have a wonderful weekend ahead, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future and hopefully on the next session.
Okay. Cheers, Justin.
Thank you,
Great to see you all. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks all. Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.